And there we go. I'm over here at Charlie Cushman's house. Today is March, what's the date today?
Today's March 20th.
This first day of spring.
Number one.
Yeah, first day of spring. And Charlie has graciously allowed us to come in and do this interview and get some pointers from him and so on. And we're just going to have a little informal question and answer session, maybe some demonstration of banjo techniques, and maybe some talk about setup. And so Charlie, thank you very much for doing this for us. 2016 Banjo Player of the Year. Your band, the Earls of Leicester, is certainly probably the foremost group in playing traditional bluegrass today. You steep yourself in the music of Flat and Scruggs. You know, tell us a little bit about how you came to appreciate and admire the music in those days, and how you became a disciple of Earl.
Well, thanks, Bob. Glad to have you visiting in my shop with me today. It's kind of nice to take a day off and do a few tax prep things.
Yeah.
It's that time of year again, first day of spring, and it's really great to have you and your wife here in our home and in the shop right now. My interest in Earl Scruggs started as a little kid, around 4 years old. I'm from about 45 minutes north of Nashville, a place called Clarksville, Tennessee, and born in 1959, and we got heavy doses of Flat and Scruggs all through the 60s on radio and television, Saturday afternoon television show over WSM TV, and Opry appearances every weekend, Martha White show, 5:45 a.m. on WSM radio. We got up early at our house and had breakfast, and while we were eating breakfast, the Flat and Scruggs show would come on. I didn't know exactly what I was listening to, but I knew that I liked it a whole lot.
That story sounds familiar. So many people
Yeah.
say that when they heard that music for the first time, it was almost like a religious experience. People, was it Marty Stewart or John Hartford, said that they were driving
Right.
along and heard Earl and Benny come on, and they almost drove off the road or something like that.
Right.
They were so impressed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing really quite like a five-string banjo being broadcast over an AM radio, especially back in the 60s when everything was analog and tube.
Yep.
And it had a warmth, it had a crackle, it had a sparkle, and it had a fire about it.
Yeah.
Especially when it was Earl Scruggs playing the banjo. And to me, the impact of that is what hooked me, rather unconsciously, I would say, to the point where I really developed a hunger for it, even as a little kid, because I started pestering my parents and my grandparents for a banjo. I wanted them to buy me a banjo. And as you well know, and everybody knows, your grandparents will do things for you that your parents sometimes won't.
Yep.
And so my granddad went down and bought a used Tisco Del Rey banjo, no resonator, double repaired neck, headstock and heel repaired neck for about $65. And from that music store, there was a repairman that worked there who could play a few tunes on the banjo, and who conversed with me when I started lessons at 7 years old. We conversed a lot about Lester and Earl, because I've been watching them on television, and like I said, being so close to Nashville, those guys came to town. They worked our county fair a few times. Anyway, he had Polaroid pictures, black and white pictures of them playing at places like Dunbar Cave, which was owned by Roy Acuff at the time, and a very active music venue. So anyway, I went over to his house a couple of times when I was taking lessons from him, 7, 8-year-old kid, and he'd get out his photograph albums and show me his candid pictures of the Foggy Mountain Boys and stuff. So I've been these guys have been on my mind for a long,
Yeah.
long time, daily.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, the first time I saw Lester and Earl play in person, and I was just, this is not a lengthy story, but it's very interesting. Uh, we used to watch those guys on TV on Saturday afternoon, and a certain portion of the show, Lester would read the show dates that were coming up
Yeah.
within
Mm-hmm.
the next 2 weeks. Well, I was sitting there watching, and he said Clarksville, Tennessee, and I reached over to my granddad. Yeah, hey, listen. Oh yeah, let's see where they're going, you know. So anyway, he said he would take me to see them, and they played in the parking lot at the Goodyear Tire dealership,
Mm-hmm.
a place
Mm-hmm.
called Maddox Tire Company. They set up out on the asphalt parking lot under a little, maybe 15 by 15 pop-up tent with microphone.
One microphone, huh?
One microphone,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And I sat on my granddad's shoulders and watched those guys, just looking right down at all of those guys. And that was my first exposure to them. And for years and years, here's the interesting part, I wondered, you know, because my memory's dim from that time. I wasn't real conscious of what year it was or anything like that as a kid. So anyway, my buddy Johnny Warren, who works alongside me in the Earls of Leicester group, Johnny told me, it was on a road trip or something, we got to talking about Lester and Earl. Of course, we talk about them a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because his dad played for
Sure,
so many
yeah.
years
Mm-hmm.
with him. Well, he told me that he had all his dad's date books from 1954 on.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I said, you know, I'll never forget the first time I saw those guys, and I mentioned the date there at the tire dealership. And he asked me, he said, what year was that? I said, I don't know. I said, but you've got some date books. I said, next time we'll go out on the road, I said, bring a few of those along from the mid-60s, and let me see if I can find that. And so sure enough, he did. And he asked me, he said, what year would you suspect it to be? And I said, well, it would probably be 1964 or 1965.
Yeah.
So he pulls out the 64 date book, starts going through it. Oh, right here, Clarksville, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Right here, June 28th, 1964.
Wow. Uh-huh.
And he said then they worked in Portland, Tennessee, the 29th, the next night, which Portland is 10 miles from us right now. And it says here, my dad's notes, it says that these were political rallies.
Really?
For a politician.
That's interesting.
And so anyway,
Mm-hmm.
after nearly 50 years of me wondering, I wonder when that was that I saw them, through Johnny's dad's date books,
You got the answer.
the answer was right there.
Uh-huh.
So that's one of my latest discoveries that's made me
Good for
made
you.
me very
Yep.
happy.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a question I've had on my mind for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, getting to play this music and being around these guys, and of course Johnny and I have been friends since just out of high school, and dear friends, and getting to play this music and stand in the shadow of Earl Scruggs, and I think all the other guys will feel the same way, is that we're standing in their shadows, and that people would let us do that and accept us to a degree, and hopefully turn back. If they've never seen anything like what we do, hopefully they will turn back, go look at Flat and Scruggs, watch the videos, go buy their records, CDs, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, that was kind of the mandate
Okay.
of the band, and to kind of take you back in time and touch on.
Yeah, well, I think
something
you're
that
you're
we're
doing
doing
an
now.
excellent job of that, because a lot of that material is on YouTube right now, and then you've
Right.
got albums and CDs that you've recorded and so on,
Right.
both with yourself and with the band, right? And
Sure.
so those are available through charliecushman.com, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can do that. We also use several outlets like county sales.
Yep. Exposed to it. Now you were taking lessons or took some lessons from the guy at the music store that sold you your first banjo through your grandfather's purchase, right?
That's true,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And how did you start to become a disciple of Earl's, to the extent where it grew from there? What sort of things went went along to make it happen?
Well, um, the evolution of that really was uh, when I started taking lessons. This would have been about 1967. There was maybe 3 books on three finger style banjo playing.
And what were they at that time? I'll let you tell. I got a pretty good idea.
Okay, well, Earl's book came out right then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe a few months, 6 months before, 6 months after. And I do remember that because the music store had a hardbound coffee table version of the book in the showcase.
Did that have the thick pages with 20 measures of Farewell Blues stuck right in the middle of Shuckin' the Corn? Was that one of the early versions of it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, but it was a hardbound book, and,
Yep.
that book, best of my memory, retailed for about $19.95.
Mm-hmm.
To me, which then would have seemed like $500,
Yeah.
But anyway, that book, and my dad did buy me the soft copy of that. Although I didn't start with that book, I started with a book called Mel Bay, Fun with the Banjo.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anyway, we had been in this music store, and the repair guy there had demonstrated to my dad and me that he could play Cripple Creek, and he could play Cumberland Gap and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
he was best of my memory. He kind of had a lope, but really that's all I had to go with. So
Mm-hmm.
and he considered to give me lessons, and we did do lessons. We started out in the Mel Bay book, The Fun with the Banjo, and it's very strange, and I still don't know why this is, but that book teaches to play the 5-string banjo with a plectrum or a pick,
Mm-hmm.
flat
Mm-hmm.
pick.
Mm-hmm.
So we started out that way, playing London Bridge and
Yep,
Mary Had
yep,
a Little
mhm,
Lamb
yep,
and
mhm.
tunes that you could grasp. As a kid, you don't often tell an adult exactly what you're thinking, so I just went along with it.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Sometime shortly after that, after I was disappointed, really. I conveyed it to him. I said, a few months ago, you had played me some songs, playing Cripple Creek and stuff with the 3-finger. I said, that's really what I want to do instead of this. He said, oh, okay. He said, that's true. He said, that's why we're doing this. So anyway, the next book that he got was another Mel Bay publication that was authored by Sonny Osborne,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which today is a pretty rare book. You never see that book.
Yeah.
And so we started doing tabs out of that book. Then the Scruggs book come along, and I was like every other kid that gets infatuated with music. I'd study the cover of the book, look at the banjo, look at his hands, the hat, the bow tie, all that stuff, all the pictures in the book, read all the dialogue in the book, and eventually I would get around to trying some of the tablature
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And as we all know, a lot of that tablature was misinformation that didn't really pan out when you tried to play it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, those were the 3 books that I had,
Uh-huh.
and I was so eager to do this that somehow I got the idea that if I could get these records, because I was starting to buy Platt and Scruggs records too, for whatever Columbia had available at that time. They had a lot of compilation records, because that period is what they were selling. And you might get a a record with Foggy Mountain Breakdown and then Petticoat Junction, you know, a greatest hits assembly of songs. And I found a version of Foggy Mountain Breakdown that was done in '65. That was not the original version. That was a little more tame.
I know what you mean.
A little more sedate. And so I figured, well, you know, I think I could understand how to play that because the first version was just like, you know, somebody shooting a Gatling gun. I couldn't grasp it. You know, it was too fast. It was too early in the game for me to do that. But anyway, I worked and I worked and I worked, and I come in one Saturday to my teacher, and I had a little GE portable record player, and I had my record album with me, and I asked him, I said, would you listen to something and help me with this?
Did you slow it down to 16 RPM to hear the note? Yeah.
I did. Yeah, I had a Voice of Music console record player that was a hand-me-down in my family, and it wound up in my bedroom. It had 16, 33, 45, and 78.
Right.
And so I did. It's exactly what I did. And I didn't show him this until I got to where I could pretty much play along with that cut. And when he saw me and heard me play along with that cut on my little portable record player there, he said, go get your dad. And so I went and got Dad and brought him back there, and he told my dad, he said I can't help the kid anymore. He said, if he's learned more on his own basically than I've taught him in the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And it's because his mind is open. There's no bounds. He can do this as much as he wants to. He doesn't have somebody telling him to do this in certain increments. You know, he said, the guy's a lot better off if we just leave him alone and let him continue this. I can't take your money anymore. And so that was the end of my formal lessons.
Okay.
And from that point on, that is how I learned. That's just it.
Learning by ear, trying to figure out what he was doing. Yep.
The tone arm, yeah.
And did you find that the more you did, the easier it becomes? I think we all gotta kind of do that. The more licks you learn, the more pieces, the more it all makes sense as you go along, right?
You know, it's a vocabulary, and it's like any vocabulary. There's phrases, there's words, there's punctuation or whatever that's repeated. It's repetitive, you know. And you start hearing all these licks, so you learn how they're used. You learn how to do them, and then you hear them surface again over here in this song, over here in that song.
Yeah.
And so you become like a sponge, and you digest the vocabulary. I'll tell you another interesting story along those same lines. My mother, at some point back, probably around 1960, 61, was a member of the Columbia Record Club. Back in those days, if you bought 3 records, they would send you a free one, 33 long play albums. And before I started kindergarten, at age 4 and a half, I was so interested in this banjo thing. And my parents had a record collection, and I'd seen them play records. I knew that when you put the disc on, be careful with the tone arm, don't scratch the record, and you turn it up, and the music comes out of this thing. Well, I was nosing around, and I found the Foggy Mountain Banjo record in her collection. And I took it to her, and I said, can I listen to this? And she looked at it, oh, yeah. I didn't even realize I had it. What it was one of the free records that Columbia had sent her. And so anyway, I started listening to Foggy Mountain Banjo pre-kindergarten. That's how long I've been digesting this.
Pre-kindergarten, wow. So that's the Bible of banjo playing right there.
It's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's never been a greater banjo record ever than that. And so, call it divine. I do. You know, that record has been in my head and it's been in my hands for 57 years.
There, you said it's been in your head, and you can jump around on this if you want, but I was going to say, what goes through a good banjo player's head while you're playing? In other words, everybody, like you're talking about learning Foggy Mountain Breakdown, learning the licks, remembering what comes next, stringing it together, and even though you're building a vocabulary, if you're just playing one or two songs, you're learning to do that by rote memorization because you don't have a broad enough vocabulary or places to use them. Then after all songs like Foggy Mountain Breakdown, Cripple Creek, Sally Gooden, there's a rote memory that's involved in learning or playing them. Then of course we get into playing the lead of, let's say, a vocal, playing backup and so on, where people graduate and start to play what they feel. What goes through the mind of a banjo player, or let's say you, for example, when you're picking? How do you differentiate between rote memory stuff and being able to play or pick as you feel? Is there a point where that comes naturally? Does it creep up on you a little at a time? How would you describe that?
Well, it's kind of like as you're learning to play the banjo, the best word I could use to describe it is conditioning.
Okay.
Okay. Uh, when you learn how to play a musical instrument, you're conditioning right and left hand, brain, eye, coordination. You're getting all those things and you're juggling them, and you're hoping that your effort is going to be what would you say, palatable. You know, so you're hoping you can get all this together to the point where it sounds like music. Okay, so during all of that, and as a kid, you know, we don't sit there and say I can't do this. We keep trying and we keep pursuing it up until whatever point that is. To where you can do this. Okay, so all these years later, when I was 13, I got my union card, the National Tennessee Musicians Union, and a friend of mine who was a musician, probably my best friend growing up, who's a great bass player here in Nashville, still active. Introduced me to some friends of his in Nashville. This is when we were still in high school, still living.
Yeah, 13 you said.
Yeah, in our home home city, and brought me to Nashville a couple of times, and I jammed with some of these country players. Well, they liked the banjo, you know, and one of the guys encouraged me. He said, you're pretty good at this. He said, if you really wanted to do this and make a living at it, he said, you need to join the musicians union. And we talked about it, and talked to my parents about it, and the fee for joining back then was $150. 13-year-old kid, I didn't have $150.
Yeah.
You know? But anyway, I talked to my parents about it, and I guess they took a chance on it and said, okay, since your friend is very secure in all this, okay, here's $150, go join the union. So I did when I was 13. Well, as fate would have it, the next year, when I was 14, I got a job working on a television show here in Nashville, 6 days a week. And so I'm off and running, you know. So I'm kind of going a long way around to answer your question, but this band that I played with a group called Carl Tipton and Mid-State Playboys. They had a television show on Channel 5 here in Nashville 6 days a week. Of course, they were all taped shows. We taped once a week. But we had a couple of ladies in the band. Along about this same time, I discovered Don Reno.
Okay.
I had started visualizing chord form and playing out of chord forms and shapes, bars, D's, F's, with somewhat of a guitar approach, left-handed. When my dad heard me doing this stuff, it didn't sound like Earl Scruggs, and he'd peck on my door and he'd say, that doesn't sound like Earl. because I was borrowing Don Reno and Red Smiley records from another friend of mine.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And my dad, he didn't know who they were. All he knew about was Flat and Scruggs. But anyway, he somewhat discouraged me from getting off the Earl sound.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, working with this band at such a young age, we had these ladies in the band who sang songs in E flat, C sharp, and my
Some of the more obtuse keys that you could come,
stuff you don't really envision audibly in your mind as banjo music, because they're in such strange keys. But anyway, that and merging with that particular point in time when I was discovering Don Reno and understanding that you could play a melody out of an F chord by playing that form shape, a bar,
Yep.
and then your D shape, which is up here would be your C.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And realizing that within those 3 frets,
You got all the notes that you need, right?
all the melody notes
Mm-hmm.
are right there.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I put that together and was able to, from my limited knowledge, but I suppose I had enough from learning to play Earl's tunes, some of the more difficult technique of Don Reno, and it seems like I had enough tools in my bag to keep that job for 5 years and get my start as a musician.
And it sounds like a little bit of sink or swim. In other words, that you were forced to pick up these tunes in the unusual keys, and so you had to really put your mind to work and figure out what was going on. And you're saying that probably is part of what contributed, where you could start to play what you were thinking or play what you were feeling, huh?
Well, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you were playing let's just use for example, Will the Circle Be Unbroken?
Mm-hmm.
And you're playing all around the melody. That's not playing the gig. You're playing on a television show with these professional players who are in their 40s and 50s, and this would have been 1974 when playing hot licks was not that prominent.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Most people, if they played their instrument, they were recognized as being good players, great players, whatever, due to their melody interpretations. So listen to that. He played the melody, but he enhanced it, without losing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hearing all this kind of talk and critique, I guess you would say. But most people back in those days tried, at least it seems like they tried harder to play melody than some of them do today.
I was just going to say that. I mean, this goes back to Earl's famous lines and quotations from his mother and so on, telling him, if you're going to play so that we can recognize the tune, right?
Exactly.
Play the melody. Yeah.
Exactly. And so anyway, all that it's synced up in time for my experience. And I was playing with some really good musicians back then that were they weren't very well known in history today. If you look back, you may not have heard of these guys, but these guys were playing on a very high level.
Now, do you think, let's say that an average, let me ask you this first. Today, do you do any teaching, anything at all? Do you, or have you done any teaching in any way, shape, or form to other banjo students?
Well, I occasionally will have somebody who wants a crash course.
You'll say, here's how a lick works, or here's how you hold a certain chord, that kind of stuff right there.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm pretty accessible, through the internet, social media, stuff like that. And I try to answer any requests that I get. Just had a fellow over here the other day whose son collaborates with my wife, who's an educator here in Nashville, he told her, he said, boy, my dad really likes Earl Scruggs style guitar playing, but he's hit a snag. He's at a point. He can't progress. And he asked me, when he found out that you're Charlie's wife, he asked me if I would ask you if you would ask him, would he consider giving me a couple of pointers on the guitar. So we set up a couple of hour lessons, and we sat right in here and put on our finger picks, and I showed him a lot of stuff, and I knew he could do it because he already had a really good ability, and I could hear that he was just missing a few essential pieces to really get up and get going with it.
Now that's interesting, because Earl's guitar playing, as admired as it is kind of a lost art or a secret. I mean, not too many people are skilled today to even understand what Earl was doing. I mean, I don't play guitar personally. I know a lot of people who have really admired, the sound listening to it, but they don't quite know what he was doing. I suppose you had to figure that stuff out on your own too, right? Guitar picking ever, and
there's not. It really helps for me. It really helps to understand his banjo approach.
Okay.
With the cleanliness, the simplicity, and in his guitar picking style. And I was like yourself. I was around Earl a lot. I was a friend of his for 35 years.
Yeah. Did you find that watching him helped you more than any kind of listening?
Well, he didn't play a whole lot of guitar around me. He mostly played banjo.
But I mean, even playing banjo, did you find that watching him helped immensely?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I jammed with him many times, and I'd say during the last 10 years, Earl, I saw him play more stuff up the neck than he did up here.
Why do you suppose that was? Because I noticed the same thing, and it almost like it seemed like it was easier for him to play up the neck. I mean, we'd get together for a jam, and he'd warm up with Foggy Mountain Special, which to me is very challenging to play. I need to warm up with some simple stuff first, but...
Right. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that most of his living was made above the 5th fret.
You think, okay.
Interpreting the songs that Leicester wrote. I heard him say more than once, he said Leicester wrote really good songs for the banjo. That fit his style. But anyway, back to the Scruggs guitar thing. What I heard out of Earl, and I learned just as a clue or two as to the approach of doing his style, is that he was a big fan, number one, of Maybelle Carter, number two, Merle Travis. He liked the old blues guys, the guys that some of them guys didn't even wear picks. They just they just play Mississippi John Hurt, stuff like that. Which the common denominator in all three of those people, to me, is feel. It's feel, and that's what Earl's guitar playing is to me. It's not a bunch of notes. It's not a bunch of difficult moves. It's all about feel. It's muting. Lots of things he mutes with the left hand that he picks with the right hand. He picks with the thumb to get a percussive thing. Some of that stuff that I was covering with the fellow that came over here not long ago, and we talked about the guitar and picking it like Earl. I don't know so much about that. I wish I did, and I'm still learning. But as quick as this Earls of Leicester thing come up, I had to move on it with what I had, and just kind of hope for the best.
What advice could you give to young banjo players today who are trying to learn traditional banjo picking? Whether it's, whether they're disciples of Earl, like most of them seem to be, if they're learning traditional. I mean, some gravitate towards Don Reno or Ralph Stanley or whatever. But what advice could you give to up-and-coming pickers who want to become effective banjo players?
Well, we have tools today that you and I didn't have. We have YouTube. We have the ability to make videos on our phones that we can watch later. That we walk up on somebody that's doing something that appeals to you and get their permission, and maybe get them off to the side, have them play it for you again. You can the whole video thing, to me has upped the game,
Mm-hmm.
so to say, for up and coming players. Now you still have to have, in my opinion, you still have to have the vocabulary up in your head.
Yep.
And so whatever the best method for you to retain that, whether it's watching videos or buying classic albums like Foggy Mountain Banjo, the Banjo Special, Don Reno, any of J.D. Crow's stuff, Sonny Osborne, wherever your taste may
Yeah,
lie.
so everybody is a little bit different in how they absorb and assimilate things, right?
Right.
And whatever works for them, when they figure what that magic moment when the light comes on, that's what they gotta try to do more of.
Right. What really worked for me, and I've passed this on to scores of people, especially when you're trying to understand the vocabulary and make the banjo say what you want it to, is that when you're in your car and you're going on a 2-hour road trip, listen to good music, listen to good banjo playing. You don't have to drive along and be paying more attention to it than you're driving. Just have it going. It's a lot of that stuff that comes in our ears. A lot of that stuff sticks.
I know what you're saying. Yep.
And I mean, we're sponges. Basically, our brains are. And so I encourage a lot of people to just keep good banjo music
at hand, easily
keep
accessible.
It at hand. And you and I are living examples of that with our collections that we have. And anyway, that's what I would tell up and coming ones. Listen to all the good stuff that you can.
Now, everybody progresses at different rates. We all know that. Some people, take to it as natural as breathing, and the other people struggle a lot with it, whether it's because of physical limitations, whether it's because their mind it's not naturally geared for music, and we all have different abilities and so on. If you run across someone who, let's say, is at the rote memory stage and can't seem to get beyond that to make music on the banjo without having to memorize it first, is there any kind of advice that you could give somebody that might help them at that point? I mean, you just told me about how you were experimenting with chords and realizing that you could play melody out of closed positions and so on. That's something that we all do, or as I like to say, does the song play easily on open strings? Does it play easily out of the first closed positions? Does it play better up the neck and so on? Because you'll find that as you go up, you'll drop a couple of low notes that are accessible and add a couple of the high notes every chord block that you go up.
Right.
So, you said a moment ago about Earl playing more things up the neck. Maybe he liked the range of notes that he got up the neck in different keys. I don't know, but
yeah, the way it struck me on that note was when I really noticed that I was jamming with him over at Oswald's house. Pastor Brother Oswald, who played the Roy Acuff, played the dobro with him for many years, and he sat down and I was playing guitar with him, and we had a good bass player and fiddle player and everything, and he went right into Lonesome Road Blues. Well, he started playing a version of Lonesome Road Blues that I'd never heard, that I'd never imagined.
Is that the one where he hooks the fifth string with his thumb and plays the G7th and leading into the C?
No, this was all bends, second, third string bends, playing melody, bending strings. I could follow what he was doing if I could watch a tape of it, and I could almost follow it as it was going down. But to hear him play something so different. Being new to my ears the first time, and possibly his too. I wasn't as I was a bit distracted on the visual thing. It was up here that I've never heard him play that tune like that before. Which what that told me is the same with any of us. If we are inspired, we will play. If we're not inspired, we'll probably go back and play something we
Uh-huh.
played the same way many a time. But if we really feel like playing something, and you know, as great as Earl was, to be inspired is a very sacred thing.
Well, here's
you
a
know?
question that's not on our list over here, but it ties into that. You know, I've sat with Earl and jammed with him many, many times over the years, and the way that he would play in his living room, and I'm sure this is true for all of us, was different than the way that he would play on stage or in the studio.
Absolutely.
How would you describe, let's say, for example, your own playing? What would you say is different about playing in your living room with a bunch of friends versus playing in a studio or doing a live show somewhere? Do you have to be? Is it just a question of being more cautious when you're in the studio or something, or do you tend to let go more and experiment wildly when there's nobody listening per se, or how would you say that?
Well, a lot of that has to do with, as you say, who is listening.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on stage, let's just say if I'm on stage and I'm playing this gig with Jerry and the guys, I'm pretty much going to stick to the script.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As a respect thing, and it's also a safety thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think people are paying us to get up there and
To practice and learn.
or to improvise.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
They're paying us to get up there and replicate, in spirit at least, this great music.
That's very interesting, because when I come down here to Nashville and I go to all the different jam sessions and try to get together with friends to pick and so on, or especially with Earl, I used to love to hear him branch out. And I don't say that I will ever really remember him wrecking something to the point where it was, you know, a lost cause. But other people have said that they've seen him do the same thing, you know, do this wild improvisatory stuff that no one's ever heard him play before. And I used to think, boy, I'd love to hear some of that on stage. But of course, the only way to get it was to get him in the comfort of his own living room. And the sky was the limit in there, so to speak.
There's a freedom in there
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine, or could we imagine, the pressure that it was to be Earl Scruggs?
Mm-hmm.
All the high expectations of everything that man ever did, and all of our thoughts and all of our favorite little nuances, and you go buy a ticket and you want to see some
Mm-hmm.
of that.
Well,
How does one man deliver all of that to all the people all the time?
I actually sort of have an answer to that. Once when I was sitting with Earl in an afternoon and he was talking to me about different things, you know the story of when they brought Hilo into the band, that allowed them to split up and take, you know, Hilo and the Timberliners could go play some music for their sponsors in one location while Lester and Earl were over at another location, another venue, and it allowed them more freedom to do that. And of course they played together on many occasions. And Earl said that their producer, promoter, whatever, wanted at one point for Lester and the band to go in one spot and Earl to go solo at another venue. And I says, Earl, you know, you don't sing. Most instrumental breaks are fairly short. They're not, you don't sit there and play a banjo instrumental for 4 minutes or whatever and then follow it with another 4-minute instrumental. What would you do if you were on stage as a solo act? What would you do? And he says, I would play Cripple Creek, Sally Gooden, and Cumberland Gap over and over and over again. I mean, he was serious about that's what he would do because that's what he could do, you know, go on autopilot with, and that's what people expected to hear done to perfection. So that was his answer to that question.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. Because you know they did pair him off with Hilo a few times.
Yes.
Earl and Hilo.
Mm-hmm. I love listening to those tapes because you'll hear him do things that you never heard him do with Lester and so on. Yep. And did you ever hear Earl play Beer Barrel Polka? Did he ever tell you about that? When I'll just interject it in here. He said that when different kinds of music were sort of grabbing the mainstay of the listeners out there, they went through a stage where they were trying to play more than just their traditional sound of bluegrass. And he says one of the songs that was popular at that time was Beer Barrel Polka. And he tried doing it on the banjo. And he said that there were parts of it that he could play, but parts of it that were just unplayable the way that he felt the tune should fit the banjo. And he says he frustrated himself like crazy and came to the conclusion from that point on that certain tunes just are not banjo material. I never had the guts to ask him, Earl, play me Beer Barrel Polka. I was always curious as to what he did or tried to do,
Yeah.
and I never heard him play it, and apparently you didn't ever hear him.
Obviously, he never heard Don Reno play it because Don Reno played the hell out of it.
I bet he did, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, there's no betting to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's on a King 579
Uh-huh.
hanging on my wall
Mhm.
there. I was very cautious about mentioning Don Reno around Earl, even though they were friends. And they loved each other, and they somewhat grew up together.
Mm-hmm.
Out of respect to Earl, I didn't talk much
Yep.
about Don
Mhm.
Reno,
Mhm.
but from my being around Earl, I gathered that Earl was possibly not familiar with all the recordings, or to what degree he
Mhm.
was familiar with any
Mm-hmm.
of Don's recordings.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, to me, in my life, Earl Scruggs is right here, and Don Reno is right there at the same place.
Mhm.
I equate them to be the same, although one has things the other one don't.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But I still put those two men as the
Mm-hmm.
masters of the five-string banjo in the style that we play. But I find that very amusing, that Earl, a tune like that would frustrate him when it was one of Don Reno's earliest masterpieces.
Yeah, he probably wasn't, if he heard it, I bet that he wasn't influenced. He wanted to play it the way his mind heard it. And
We can certainly understand that.
mhm.